This is one of these pay-per-views that when you review it, you end up talking very little to almost nothing about the actual matches on the card, because obviously one theme kind of plays heavily on everybody's mind, and today it's appropriate to talk about it because it was 14 years ago on this day, back on May 23rd, 1999, that we saw Over the Edge 1999, which led to, unfortunately, the untimely passing of certain Hall of Famer Owen Hart, and figured it was appropriate to take a look back at this because it's 14 years ago on this day. But also, a lot of the people that watched this, they were a lot younger when this happened, or in some cases never saw it happen, or don't necessarily maybe understand the full historical scope. Or some of you that do, it's just kind of a trip down a bad memory lane.
Absolutely.
Well, we got some of the things to talk about here. First off, the interesting thing about Over the Edge, though, is that this Over the Edge was going to be the first pay-per-view. It was the first pay-per-view that wasn't billed under the In Your House series.
Right.
This was when they were starting to break away from the In Your House, and they were just going to make them regular full-price monthly pay-per-views. So, this was also a show, back in '99. This was a time where the company was still very hot.
Mm-hmm.
They had a lot of things going right for them. They were starting to kick WCW's ass on a consistent basis. And you had a lot of big stars on this show. You had guys like Rock and Austin and Taker and
Triple H.
I mean, those four guys were part of the last two matches on this card.
Right.
So going into this show, there were a lot of expectations that this was going to probably be one of those really good pay-per-views. And I know we both got stories about this pay-per-view, but yours kind of goes back, from a personal standpoint, back to Over the Edge 98. Because you didn't actually watch Over the Edge 99 live, did you?
No. Well, what had happened was in '98 that shortly after I got done watching that pay-per-view, the dad that raised me, I found him and he had passed away. I would say maybe 10 minutes after we got done watching it. So this pay-per-view, I set out, I wanted to order it, but I just didn't feel right about ordering it. So I didn't, and I was having a friend tape it for me. And while he was taping it, he called me and then told me what was happening. And unfortunately, it was true. And I had some serious bad luck those 2 years in May. But
as far as Over the Edge 99, I actually did watch the show.
Mm-hmm.
Was able to get to a friend's house and watch it on a Sunday night. And, it was back in a time where I didn't have cable and I didn't get to watch all the pay-per-views. A lot of the times the way I'd be able to keep up on the product, frankly, was watching Raw at somebody else's house or Nitro at somebody else's house.
Sure.
Or sometimes having to get the kayfabe mags, the after mags, or having to sit there and watch some of the, the recap shows on the weekend. Sometimes would be the only way to follow. But this was a time I was actually going to be able to watch the pay-per-view.
Right.
And imagine my sheer delight when this pay-per-view actually happened. Now, heading into this show, you have your first two matches on the card. You go through, and it just looks like it's going to be a regular match.
Yep.
Or a regular show, and it looked like it could be something good.
Mm-hmm.
But then you get to Owen Hart and his pre-recorded segment.
Right.
And it almost worked out better this way.
Yep.
It was kind of funky that you were having this, but you were doing the stunt with Owen Hart coming down while you were showing the pre-recorded thing. It's almost like they were anticipating something was going to go wrong. Fortunately, it did. He fell 70 feet. He hit his chest on the turnbuckle area, and later on that night, he passed away officially. And I guess the first question I have to ask you is, when you back then and looking back at it now, should the show have continued?
I guess I wasn't part of the company, so I don't know what it's like to do this day in and day out. But I tell you what, if I were them, it would be very difficult for me. I understand where Jeff Jarrett was coming.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was one of his best friends, and he's sitting there after he sees his friend fall 70 feet, knowing he's probably dead. Then he's got to stay and get in character and cut a promo. Come on, man.
Yeah, I guess it kind of depends on who you are and whatnot. And if it were me, I would say no. I wouldn't be able to do it. But I know that there are professionals out there that would say we got to go out and do it and stuff like that. And I understand that, and I appreciate that. Just from my personal standpoint, I wouldn't be able to do it.
And as far as me, I think it was absolutely ridiculous. And this is, to me, in terms of black marks on Vincent K. McMahon, this is the ultimate black mark. Don't give me that WWE corporate bullshit of sitting there and trying to give us that propaganda of Owen would have wanted it. Well, did we know? Did we ask him? He probably wouldn't have.
Right.
You know, or even if he did, let's use some common sense here. You had 20,000 people just saw somebody fall and die.
Right.
A lot of his friends and coworkers, they were family too. And now you're saying, you know, and hats off to these people for being professionals, because you had some matches that ended up being all right. Triple H, Rock, you know, for Austin and Taker to go out there and have a good match in the main event with all that shit on their mind.
Right.
I mean, no, the show shouldn't have fucking went on. If there was ever a point in time where I think everybody should have rebelled against Vince and at least short-term stopped watching the product, it should have been this time.
It
This
made
ridiculous.
it look like a money grab.
It did.
Yeah, because, you know, I mean, they could have ended it right there and said, hey, you know, this is what it is, you know, here's your money back.
And the whole thing about the stunt and all of that stuff, you know, this was the Blue Blazer gimmick where they were trying to mock some of the old heroes of wrestling, if you will. But, you know, it's just, how do you skip on those shortcuts, man? How do you not make sure 100% that this is safe? I mean, when people ask, do you believe in your heart of hearts that Vince McMahon or Vince Russo or anybody else in the company killed Owen Hart?
Do I? No. Do I believe that they killed him? No, I don't believe it.
Now, I don't think it happened in terms of a conspiracy. Did somebody intend to kill him as a way to get back at Bret Hart? No, I don't believe it.
It was a complete total accident. I mean, it's pretty much.
Now, did they maybe cause the death through negligence or not following protocol? So then in that way, you could say they maybe involuntarily killed him.
Right.
And, you know, 14 years later, we look back at this. You know, obviously, we're not in the Hart family. We weren't, you know, a member of that community at that time in terms of being in the wrestling business. So maybe it's kind of hard for us to judge and throw stones here. But to me, I look at it and I say, you know, somebody should have been held to task and somebody should have been held accountable, because a husband, a father, a friend, a family member, you know, lost his life because of a stupid gimmick, a stupid accident.
Did the company that was in charge of the rigging on that, didn't they ever get a lawsuit placed against them?
I think they did.
Yeah, I thought they did. So
I know Martha ended up suing WWE and got millions off of it.
Something like 18 million or something.
The real, you know, and the ironic thing is when you look at this, and you know, when you talk about professionalism, the professionalism of Lawler and JR to be able to commentate and talk about it.
I don't know how they got through it.
I don't either. I mean, it's, you know, it's one of those
especially
things,
after not so much the part where, you know, they were talking about what had just happened. I'm talking about when JR got back on TV and he's had to report that Owen Hart had died. I don't know how they got through that after that point.
I don't either. And it's just one of those things, when you look at this show, frankly, this was a show that was terrible. And when you look at it, you know, you give it a Z. You give it the lowest possible grade you could because of the fact of what happened, because of the fact that the show continued when, in most people's opinion, it clearly shouldn't have. I mean, there is a point in time where you have to use some good sense and use some decorum and, you know, use your better judgment. But the tragic thing about this is the next night they do the Owen Hart tribute show, and it's almost like in an indirect way they're kind of capitalizing off of somebody's death.
In a sense, yes, but I think that the workers in the company also, for themselves, they needed that closure as well.
But this is what I don't get, is it's always been reported for years that everybody was given the option of whether or not they wanted to work on the show or not, that tribute show. Well, why didn't we sit there and say, why didn't all the boys and all the members say, led by an Austin or a Rock or whatever, and say, Taker, and say, no, we're not working it. What's Vince going to do? He's going to fire his whole fucking talent roster?
Right.
No, fuck that.
Right.
So I realize this is hard to look back and say, you know, we've got the benefit of time, it heals the wounds, and we can look from the outside looking in. But I'm looking at it, if I'm in that perspective, and I've seen one of my compatriots, one of my friends or family members die like that, then fuck you, I'm not going on, I'm not wrestling, what are you going to do, fire me?
Well, I think that, if I remember right, that show was very limited to what they had. I don't think that there was any big main events or anything with an Undertaker, with an Austin, or anything like that. It was just a lot of his friends going out there and having wrestling.
No, I'm talking about the pay-per-view though. Why didn't they sit there? They gave him the option. Well, why didn't you give him the option to sit there and say, you know, we're not going to have the show?
Right.
You know, because I mean, for what was it? The pay-per-view bag, one of the old In Your Houses, I believe it was, where the power went out, so they redid the pay-per-view a couple nights later.
Yeah.
You couldn't redo this pay-per-view at some point in time?
Right.
Come on.
Yeah.
But that ended up being an incredibly highly rated show. I mean, you had the poignant moment where Austin, you know, who Owen Hart almost ended his career, let's be honest, and there was still some animosity there. But it was one of those things that it was a very surreal experience watching that Raw the next night,
Oh,
wasn't it?
geez, yeah, it was tough. You know, it's just tough watching his friends go out there. You know, or the interview segments. You know, just watching them break down. Some of them, you know, were telling rib stories and stuff like that, which was cool. You know, to break it up.
One of the
and
rare
whatnot, but-
times in that time in '99, it was still unprecedented to do a lot of that, breaking
Right.
character, breaking kayfabe, and really go behind the scenes. I mean,
Right.
this was one of those first real major opportunities where you saw that happen, and unfortunately it came in this circumstance. But when you look at the impact on this in the years to come, and you look and you see that some of this incredible high-risk shit that wasn't necessary kind of stopped.
Yeah.
You almost wonder if the wrestling business has never been the same since this moment happened. Yeah, you've seen, and when you look at Martha Hart, now obviously she lost her husband, and their kids lost their father.
Right.
But when you look at her, do you think it's a situation where she's always going to be in the right and WWE was in the wrong, or do you think there's a point in time where you need to start the healing process and you can't take the grudge with you to the grave, or it'll kill you?
Yeah, I think that, you know, I mean, it depends on the person, obviously, and that. But you know, if it were me, I would think that the healing process has to start at some point, and I would say, what better point than now? But you know, then again, it's not me who lost. You know, I didn't have that loss.
Yeah, and imagine like for Brett, he had left the company late '97 under the circumstances, whether you believe it's a real or well, like me, if you believe it's a work, whatever the case might be with the Montreal Screwjob. Point being is he's wrestling for the competition, and then he finds out that Owen's passed away.
Right.
I mean, can you imagine that feeling? And he's talked about it before, the fact that he holds himself personally responsible. And if I was in Brett's position, I probably would too, to be honest with you. Because I would say, if I was there, maybe I would have talked him out of it. Or maybe I would have made sure that it was secure. Or maybe I would have tested it first.
And even going further from this, you can even tell how difficult it was for Brett to go out there in Kemper Arena the night that he had that match with Benoit in WCW. You can still tell that it really hung with him. And then, so
we never had another Over the Edge show. They never put this on DVD. They never put this on VHS, and that's probably for good reason. Yeah. It still lives on the internet, and that's fine. You know, it's one way you could actually watch and see the entire show. You've never seen something where you have one attitude, and then at a certain point in time, the entire environment changes, and everybody's just going through the motions. I've never seen a show where people go through the motions more, both in terms of the performers, the commentators, and the fans.
Yep.
Owen Hart's ultimate legacy, though. Passed away 14 years ago on this date.
Too soon.
To me, he was a perfect example of a guy that when you looked at him when he first got there, he was fed a lot of shit, similar to his brother in a lot of ways. But he overcame, kept working at his craft,
The
ultimate star.
Overachiever.
Yeah.
He was not supposed to be where he was at in that company, but he went out there and he
not bad for being somebody that was a nugget.
Exactly.
I mean, but Owen Hart was a versatile performer. He was great in the mid-card, great in the tag team scene.
Yes.
I could go on and on.
He was even great in main events, too, with his brother.
Oh, man. I mean, when you talk about something that the wrestling business is missing today, are those sibling rivalries. One of the greatest sibling rivalries of all time was Brett versus Owen in '94.
Yep.
Absolutely. And it's sad when you look back. It makes you feel kind of old, doesn't it, man? 14 years ago.
It does.
I was a senior in high school getting ready for graduation, and you know, just like I said, it just strikes me how fast time goes by and how much things, you know, change. And
you
know, you look back at the wrestling business and what it used to be versus where it is now, and you see back then where maybe they were pushing the envelope too much.
Right.
Maybe they could stand to push the envelope a little bit more now, but back then maybe they pushed it too much. Is this a show that you should ever really bother to watch? No.
No.
Nothing really good comes from it, frankly. I mean, you know, it's even when you look back at the product, though, it's sad because everybody mattered at that time. The mid-card guys, the Godfathers, who was supposed to wrestle in Owen Hart on this particular night, you know, the D'Lo Browns, everybody mattered.
Yep.
And, you know, just that quickly.
Take it away.
Take it away. Our next review will be of Slamboree 1993.
Yes.
That's going to be an interesting one because that show is frankly a train wreck. But it's a review of Over the Edge 99. It's more of a discussion than it was anything else because there's not a lot to really review or talk about on this show because it's all about one thing, really. But Owen Hart is still missed to this day, and, you know, hopefully someday he'll find his rightful place in the WWE Hall of Fame and everybody involved can begin the healing process.